Jacquie and Jher. They'll all come down here eventually. They're going to introduce themselves, but this is developing an online presence and portfolio. We're going to start, they're each going to have sort of like 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 15 to talk. Then we'll have time for them to sort of respond to each other's presentations, and then obviously we'll all chat. But before they get started, I just wanted to announce that we're having a reception tonight at Carol's house at 6. The directions are up there by the food, so please feel free to join us. Come chat, eat, be merry, you know, all those good things. So this is Mara.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mara Williams. I'm a PhD student in journalism and communication, and I'm very happy to be on this presentation collection, this panel. Although I have to be a little bit honest that in terms of like a couple of the questions that are on the website about having an online presence and an online portfolio, they're very professionalized, right? It's about academia.edu, it's about LinkedIn, and about using Twitter. And I have a Twitter account. I use it for conferences. I tweeted today. The last time I tweeted was when I was in Australia. Like, I don't tweet. And I don't, I use Facebook, but only when I'm procrastinating. So if I'm using Facebook, that's a sign. You should call me and tell me to do my work. But so mostly I wanted to use this time to think about the things that I do on the internet. Because like Stacy was saying this morning about talent, right? And about thinking about what we do online in multiple places and harnessing that energy and what we can think of in terms of like, I have an online presence. It's just not on Twitter, right? And so what does it mean to think about the internet and the ways that we are present on the internet in ways that this portfolio of activity, it might live in somewhere like LinkedIn, but it might live somewhere else. And then in the discussion, so I'm going to try to keep my part short so other people can have a little bit more time. We can think about how to fully transfer, right, the kind of skills and the kinds of activities that we do in maybe non-professional spaces, and sort of what do we want out of that, right? What can we translate, and why might we want to translate it, right? So what's the point of having an online presence? Is it to be visible when someone Googles your name when you're on a job search? Or is it, you know, for your students? Or is it to connect with other researchers or to connect with artists and activists? Like, sort of who are you talking to? And I think that that impacts how we think about digital presence. But the main thing, the main one point that I want to make is about online presences and about how there's not one internet, right? There's not one space on the internet, and the internet is not one thing. And one theorist that I found really helpful for thinking about this, Patricia Lang, who does work on YouTube and YouTube video blogging communities, she used a term called fractalized communities. And the idea being that no community on the internet is fully private or fully public, and that there's not, this isn't a one big room, but that we have these spaces, right? Spaces that if you're hooked into them, you can find more easily, that you know the norms, you know the languages, you know the literacies, right, of those spaces. And then to think about, so who are we talking to, right? So what's the community that we're within, and what are the norms that are happy there? I'm sure you've all seen this before, right? This is the XKCD map of online communities. This is the newer version. But again, to think about online spaces and to think about online presences as who you are in these different spaces and who you are when you're talking in community. And so for me, thinking about when I teach or when I'm writing, I pull on my expertise, right? My expertise as a fan, my expertise in certain meme cultures and certain game cultures. Sometimes I use them and it makes my students laugh. Sometimes they look at me like I'm crazy and they're like, what do you mean you play games? We play Farmville. That's not a game. You know, so thinking about the portals, right? The portals that I go through on the internet might be different than the ones that my students use, and they might be different than the ones that other researchers that I'm talking to use. And so I think also being self-reflexive about what kind of internet knowledges do I bring to the kind of work that I'm doing and the kind of professional, if we want to professionalize this, and I kind of want to hold back from professionalizing this because I feel a lot of pressure to do that. And I wonder what it would be like if we're talking about what kinds of digital publishing we want to build, what kinds of digital teaching tools we want to build, and what kinds of digital communities we want to build. What if we just kind of held off on the professionalization for like 30 seconds? Just to see what else we might do and what else we might draw on. Because like I said, when I first approached this, I was like, how can I talk about this? I don't have a LinkedIn. But I have a lot of experience in live journal fan communities, and in QZAP, the Queersian Archive Project, which is an online collective that uses open source software, and that we meet over Skype, and we meet in person, and we do things using technology that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And that's a literacy that I have that doesn't get easily professionalized. And so thinking, again, more broadly about the sort of multiple ways that we're using our own literacies. This, by the way, if you don't know, is Privilege Denying Dude on Tumblr. He's Privilege Denying Dude 2.0. I'll tell you more stories about that later if you want. But so I also wanted to bring just some questions about the idea of a digital portfolio or a digital sort of professional presence. And one is to think about the circles, right? I hate Google+, but to think about those circles, right? So who are you maintaining an identity for? And what kinds of aspects of that identity need to be managed? And how do we go about doing that? So who's the audience? Who am I talking to, and what kind of language do I need to use? And is it an individual activity, or can there be such a thing as a collective online presence? And what does it mean to be part of that? And what other models of online activity can we look to other than social media? And this is especially important for folks like me who don't thrive on social media, right? That's not the language that I use. I'm working on it. But for me, if the answer to having an online presence is use Twitter or use Facebook, that doesn't work for me. So can we look to blogs, or can we look to bulletin boards or games or other sorts of online activities to think about that, about a digital presence? And then, as a feminist, as a lady online, how do I make my politics visible, and how do I keep myself safe? Which is part of my reluctance to use social media constantly, is that I don't always want to be visible. Like, I don't always want my identity to be up for discussion, and there are times and places when it's appropriate, and I'm willing to do that. And then there are times and places where I also want to maintain the privilege of not being up for discussion and not being visible online. And so I lurk, and so I don't tweet, and that kinds of things. So how do we keep a kind of feminist ethic in the room with us, and how do we talk about visibility in a way that allows us as feminist scholars to use these tools without sort of becoming controlled by it, which is something that I feel a little bit pressured. So those are my questions, and I'm happy to hear what my other presenters have to say about them. So thank you so much. Do you have your dongle? You do.
Hello. I'm Jacquie Wallace, and I want to thank Carol and Chelsea and Phoebe and Bryce and everyone for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. You guys have been amazing, and U of O feels like home already. The other really cool thing is I think there's going to be a lot of common themes, and already I feel like some of what I'm going to talk about is going to echo what Mara already talked about, which is a great thing, and hopefully there'll be some areas where we maybe we disagree a little bit. So I'm going to start out talking about building digital persona as well, and bring in a little bit of my own history and my own roots in terms of design, branding, aesthetics, and kind of where I come from. I did a BA in modern languages a long time ago, an MA in communications, and then I worked for about 8 years in multiple design and visual media companies, one of which I was a co-founder of. So I'll tell you a bit about that and how that's influenced my thinking around how do you build a digital persona in terms of your professional situation, and particularly as a feminist doing scholarship. And I definitely don't have all the answers. In fact, I have a lot of questions, so hopefully we can find some answers together. So in terms of branding, branding has a really bad reputation, I think. I think it's often a dirty word. It's often considered a really subversive way to get people to buy stuff. And I don't think that's completely inaccurate or unfair, but I'm also here to somewhat appeal to you to consider design and aesthetics as part of the thinking around positioning oneself professionally, as a creative, as a feminist, and even as we're talking about Fembot in the journal, you know, what might its design and aesthetic look like in terms of creating a community and a following that falls in love with the brand Fembot. So I've been involved with 3 different companies. Jher is a company I co-founded with 12 other people back in 2002. It's a company that sells visual media, so photography, illustration, fonts, and motion footage. And we started with 12 people, and we ended up with 150 people around the world in Calgary, Seattle, Berlin, and London. And Corbis is another brand that I've worked with and did a whole rebranding of the company. And for those of you who may know Corbis, it's quite a large company based in Seattle, and it's owned by Bill Gates, and they have the rights to archives like the Batman Archive with Ansel Adams' work, the Warhol Archive, Condé Nast's photography. So it was a really incredible experience in terms of rebranding a company that's so embedded in visual media, Americana, historical, archival culture, and all beef media, which is a newer thing in my life. So I want to talk just for a moment about conventional brand strategy, and then I'll position it in terms of those companies. So conventional brand strategy really talks about aligning the thinking around brand with the organization's vision, whether that's a person or an organization, could be a not-for-profit, you know, many things. Defining the core attributes of the brand, so what does it stand for, and what's meaningful about it. Creating a distinct look and voice, and so that it's very much consistent and frequent and memorable, and so you just come to know, and we know many good brands that, you know, are that way. Some of whose politics we may question, but certainly in terms of their visual presence, they're very recognizable. And often brands are reinforced at every possible touch point. So it's not just a visual thing, it's very much any experience with that brand reinforces those attributes. So this is just a bunch of stuff from Jher. We would create a lot of print communications to showcase the photography and the fonts and all of that. And being a very kind of consistently branded, but also we were talking to graphic designers, and so it was very much a peer-to-peer kind of situation. And so we wanted to appeal to them to speak their language. You know, we would talk in color references, we talk pop culture references, we talk designer speak that not everyone else would get, like the irony of I draw pictures all day, which is what everyone thinks graphic designers do, but in fact they're very strategic visual communicators. I talked a little bit about Corbis and some of the archives that Corbis has, and this was just one example of a massive rebranding effort. And All Beef Media is a very cheekily called company of 3 women, myself and 2 other women. It's a social media strategy and content company. And so we actually create strategy and content for other brands, for not-for-profits, a whole host of different kinds of organizations, and do some pro bono work for feminist organizations like 60 Million Girls is one of our groups that we work with. So all of that to say, what impression are you making? What kind of impression do you want to make? And so what are some of the considerations outside of maybe conventional thinking that could inform this? Here's 3 brands that I think we'd all recognize. And if someone's emotionally attached enough to a brand to tattoo it on themselves, that's potentially a statement of the brand's power. But these are also very emotional connections, and so people who are Apple fanatics are Apple fanatics because the brand somehow resonates with them, and can be distilled down into one word. And Apple's is style, Harley Davidson is freedom, and Adidas is athletics. So then I had to ask myself, well, what are feminist approaches to all of this, and what would feminist thinking bring to it, and feminist methods, and are there particular feminist, queer, post-colonial approaches and strategy that we should be thinking about? And so I started thinking about, like some of the principles that we all hold dear around self-reflexivity, my own assumptions, my own agendas, and how do I communicate that when I'm thinking about my own online persona? A really strong commitment to authenticity and transparency and being who you are and reflecting that back in a way that is authentic to who you are. The idea around multiple subjectivities, that I can be a feminist, but I may also be a designer, a researcher, a partner, a mother, all these things. And how do I reflect that in my online persona? Do I want to? Do I want to make those other subjectivities known? A commitment to process and exposing process, and ideas around inclusiveness. And I know it's been brought up quite often in the last day and a half. And so I started to question, like, how do you convey this? And so choices of language. I mean, Bryce just talked about in terms of open source and some of the pedagogical choices, choice of technology, and embodying those values and what types of technology do we use for these. And again, choice of process. So exposing experimental work, work in progress, unfinished work, and that being part of embodying those values of your digital presence or your digital persona. In our panel, we had a bunch of different topics, and one of them is social media. There were others, but there's really not time to go into all of them. So I'm quite comfortable with social media and quite involved, and so I started to think about this part of it as well. And so there's so many social media channels now, and I think what's really important is that you find the ones that resonate with you, that are meaningful to you, that allow you to be who you are and represent yourself in the way you want to represent yourself. So these are ones that I am involved in some way, shape, or form. I will say I did some research on LinkedIn just to kind of, because it's sort of the social media channel for professional context. The research I could find that said that 67% of recruiters go to LinkedIn first to look at your professional profile. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know in the academic context, what that all means. And so then in terms of feminist approaches, I just have a lot of questions. So who feels like they can tweet, post, Instagram, document using social media channels? How do you represent your politics? I mean, Mara asked the same question in these types of media. Do you ever feel like you have to hide or be discreet or not fully participate or avoid participation? And why, like, what is that all about? And what kind of barriers are there as feminists, as scholars, can we talk about today? Academics doing it well, these are 3 that I can kind of think about, and I'm sure we can argue about this, but I just wanted to add some examples, and I have a few screenshots from Sydney Eve's work that we can very, very quickly look at. this is just some of the parts that are super important to acknowledging when you're building your social media profile. Your bio is really important. It needs, in a snapshot, someone needs to be able to tell what kind of research you do, how are they going to connect to you, what is it that's meaningful about you that would make them want to follow you in the Twitter context. I won't go through all of these, but the idea of giving and taking, this is very much a relationship, and so you don't build community and build social capital by just broadcasting out constantly things that you think other people want to hear. It's very much about listening, listening to your peers, asking them questions, finding out more. And the other really, I think, valuable part of social media is using it as an information stream and going into the follower lists of people you follow, see who they follow, and finding out who those people are. And in fact, they may be very, very interesting and useful for you. I'm happy to talk about all of these things in a lot more detail at any other point. Here's just a quick couple of examples. So Jesse Daniels and Michael Geist. Well, Michael Geist is a really well-respected scholar in Canada on policy and the internet. His bio is terrible. Like, he needs to tell us a little bit more about him. And Jesse Daniels gives us more information that I think is a lot more useful in a snapshot. Sydney Matrix, she's, I think, one of the most consistent scholars I know of in terms of a presence. So this is her Twitter page, Google+, LinkedIn, Vimeo, and her Quora page. And so I think she's an interesting model as one way of doing it. And then which communities are receptive? So these are a few that I can think of. I know Bitch Media has come up, Bitch Magazine, a number of times in the last bit. And I'm very curious to explore dirty laundry and what that's going to look like, and contribute to that in whatever way I can. And then just some last thoughts. This whole question around free and emotional labor, so how much is enough? The tensions and mashups of our feminist and our other disciplinary or private or public sector experience. How do we put that all together? What do we want to show? What's personal? What's professional? And how do we mind the virtual fence, or do we? How do we represent our multiple subjectivities? And I just really strongly believe in community and talent and collaboration. And so connecting those two, I think, is a real opportunity here, too. That's it. Thanks.
Hello. I just want to say thank you very much to the committee and everyone involved in this conference. It's been a fantastic one, and I'm honored to be able to participate, and just want to say thank you very much. My name is Jher. I'm a PhD student in Communication and Society, affiliated with the Institute of Cognitive Decision Sciences, Center for Advanced Technology and Education, and Center for Learning in Virtual Environments, as well as Media at the University of Oregon. I just want to read this quick disclaimer. This is an end-user license agreement for this experience that you all have to agree to. Throughout this presentation, you may feel like I'm attempting to nail down the meanings of these terms to find a universal definition. Nothing could be further from the truth of the situation. Instead, the plurality of responses and points of view for each of the terms is meant to open recognition for the ambiguous and contextually dependent nature of their uses, etc. Therefore, think of these terms not merely in a hierarchy of concepts or a network of interrelations only, but in interpersonal, serial, centralized, radial, decentralized, and circularly participative ways, just to name a few methodological frames. Thank you for your consideration. Let's begin. So a number of the folks have talked about open source systems. I'm just going to give a quick rundown of how some of those play out beyond content management systems. Of course, we have the GNU Linux operating system, which most notably is used by Ubuntu, by most users, languages, Ruby on Rails, etc., web servers, MySQL, for example, various forms of software, again, content management systems, identity meta systems like Shibboleth, which is used here at the University of Oregon, licenses, including the MIT license, and a variety of metaverses and virtual environments. And open access is a big part of my life, and I've been a champion of that space for a number of years now, going back to the time I was at the Emerging Technologies Conference at Stanford, as well as the work that's being done here locally at the University of Oregon with Fembot, which I feel is an awesome step in the right direction for open access publishing writ large. As well as the sort of symbolic systems and languages of these ideas and how they're starting to come together. I'm not an expert in this realm, so I just mentioned that right off the bat. But I just wanted to sort of give you my sort of maybe a more aesthetic view and artistic view from my background and see how that plays out. So you can imagine the All Is Full of Love video by Bjork and the Creative Commons sort of mashup I'm trying to bring together here. But I'm going to basically focus on is an artist and filmmaker, Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, as a sort of case study of someone that I've been following her work and have had the opportunity and great pleasure of spending time with. And I just want to sort of bring her work to the fore and sort of show my introduction to the field and where my research might end up going in the future. So Lynn is affiliated as chair to the film department at San Francisco Art Institute, professor emeritus at UC Davis, A.D. White professor at large at Cornell, and has a working archive that's a part of the Stanford University Library since 2004. These are both screenshots from installations that she did, this one here from Stanford and the other from another work that she created, which I will be going into more detail later. Her website is really nice in terms of bridging sort of old digital aesthetics and new digital aesthetics, and her NEA grant in 2005 and Guggenheim Fellowship in 2009 really echo the larger community's response to her work around identity and the age of consumerism, privacy in a time of surveillance, interfaces of humans and technology, and the relationship between real and virtual worlds. Her background is in installation art, performance art, interactivity, video, and photography. Her filmography, and I recommend these films, Conceiving Ada, about Ada Lovelace, and Technolust were her early works in her filmography. Her work, Strange Culture, in 2007 was to help Steve Kurtz, who's a UC Berkeley professor, out of a bind he was in with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And up here is Henrik Benediktsson, who is no longer at the Stanford Humanities Lab, but is running Kata Space Labs, and Michael Shanks, who runs Metamedia at Stanford, with Lynn developing this archive. And this is where my introduction to her work really came, was around her project Life Squared, and his work in Archive 3.0 and animating the archive, which is actually what I participated in 2009, which was a tour of her virtual installation in Second Life, which I highly recommend. Still there, and I definitely would recommend taking a peek at it. And sort of how the emergence of a sort of post-Web 2.0, Archive 3.0 space is starting to emerge, and how the animation of these archives, this is actually from the Stanford Humanities Lab installation, and they're actually showing the film Strange Culture in the virtual environment. At that same time, I was also able to attend the De Young Museum presentation. She gave an installation on a No-Body Special, part of her Life to the Nth, Power to the N installation there. And I've passed out some materials for you guys to sort of take a peek at that. So I won't go into too much detail on that at all. But more recently, and fantastically enough, her work at the with feminist art was translated from her 40 years of work into a film that the Cinema Pacific and Cinema Studies Department here at the University of Oregon premiered on Wednesday, which I had an opportunity to see, and highly recommend seeing the film itself. It really does give a fantastic overview of the timeline. This is just a quote of, from The Secret History of Feminist Art with roots in 1960 anti-war and civil rights protests. The film details major developments in feminist art through the 1970s and explores how the tenacity and courage of these pioneering artists, including Miranda July, the Guerrilla Girls, Yvonne Rainer, Judy Chicago, Yoko Ono, Cindy Sherman, Barbara Kruger, etc., really brings them all together and paints a fair, for my views, a very nice portrait of the development of it over time. One of the pieces I do want to focus on in sort of changing gears and how this might apply to this panel is how her use of emerging new media is creating new dialogue spaces. She had an installation, which I have a video of, but depending on time, I may or may not show parts of it, but I'd be free and available afterwards if you guys want to do a screening of some kind. She did with the Tate Modern with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, Lawrence Lessig, who the proponent of and founder of Creative Commons, Gilberto Gil, Lena Pontes, I can't ever predict. Thank you very much. Apologize about that. And Tilda Swinton, and her character in the installation is actually Jean Ware, which is her Second Life avatar. So this opens up where are we going online, and how are these things starting to merge, and where is open source technology bridging into these virtualized environments. So as HTML5 has now been implemented with Firefox and Chrome and a variety of other web browsers, HTML5 comes sort of jam-packed with WebGL, which uses HTML5 canvas elements to generate interactive 3D graphics compatible with a web browser. So what I'm saying is you don't need Second Life to invent your own virtual environment anymore. You don't need someone else's environment to do that. And most specifically, funny enough, Henrik Benediktsson was the one that started this, is the open source virtual world of Suricata. It's an exemplary notion of what I'm considering meta-versatility. And this is a platform for building virtual world applications, not inhabiting them, in games and meeting spaces. And Suricata and Kata Space Labs are two fantastic resources for that, and all of the source code is available on GitHub. And so this builds on virtual intercorporeality, which Hubert Dreyfus, who's the known artificial intelligence critic at UC Berkeley, gave a fantastic talk with at the same conference with Lynn on virtual embodiment and myth and meaning in Second Life. So if you can imagine, these are bringing together hands-free environments where a person moves their gestures in some way, and the avatar does the same on the screen in real time. Facial recognition, voice recognition, and geolocation. It's being applied to popular culture, such as Avatar and Tron. The Xbox Kinect has been open sourced, and this 3D camera system is in the midst of being used by hackers at MIT and a variety of other academic institutions. And then that extends, I'm extending that notion to neurotechnology in the metaverse, which is just an emerging and developing field at this point, which I wanted to bring everyone's attention to. That neurofeedback and personal interface for human-computer interaction is building a neurosignal acquisition and processing wireless neuro headset that also will give real-time brain activity monitoring as well. It can be used for a variety of different resources and possibilities, but this has also been open sourced. So the open source neurofeedback was open sourced in 2010, just in September 2010. So that's both for the headset and the software. And if you'd like some more resources on OpenEEG, I recommend the SourceForge database for that. So in this regard, I'm positing a meta-activity with mirror neurons and mirror worlds converging and rapidly becoming a reality. We are in the midst of a new wave of meta-activities, remixing boundaries across analog and digital domains. These are echoed by some early writings and recent writings in trans and post-human anthropologies, Dana Haraway and Catherine Hales and Carrie Wolf, as well as the, just wanted to touch on that aesthetic as well. And then most recently, these ideas are moving forward with a colleague of mine who has invented the CYBORG Camp and CYBORG Anthropology websites, which I would highly recommend, so cyborganthropology.com. Amber Case was recently featured on TED Women. It's a great talk. I highly recommend it. It's called We Are All Cyborgs Now. So that's definitely something worth pointing to. I'm running out of time, so I'll just keep it short in saying some of the ideas that I think will help us sort of navigate the future of the digital humanities themselves. How do these media affect the disciplines in which they are used? What do these disciplines contribute to the knowledge of computation? And what does the new medium enhance, obsolesce, retrieve, and reverse when pushed to its extremes? Again, my background here at the University of Oregon is with metamedia and opening what I'm calling guideposts for a fourth life. And the variety of folks from Stanford, Harvard, and a variety of other institutions that are doing this work. And my, the prototypes I've created here at the university and situations, experiences, and environments and tours with a variety of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. This brings my work full circle with work I did at the Museum of Art on campus years ago. And I want to just say thank you very much to Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, the UCLA Center for Digital Humanities, Carol Stabile, and the Center for Study of Women in Society, the Gender, New Media, and Technology Research Interest Group, and Lynn Anderson and Gabriela Martinez at the Center for Advanced Technology and Education. Thank you again for your time.
our different takes on the idea of digital presence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like in terms of not just as like, I mean, even if you take the idea of the avatar in each of our talks, it was a really different, they're sort of operating at different levels. And so I don't know if I have a question about that yet, other than that was really cool, and aren't we all cool?
But I think it just brings up the complexity of the discussion, right? And how do you explore your own personal online experience, and then how do you then disseminate it out to an audience? And there can be lots of different kinds of audiences, right?
Right. And as these ideas are emerging from social media and civic media and into these virtual environments themselves, it seems to be moving in very interesting and creative ways.
And I think there's norms of different communities maybe that are really relevant too, right? I mean, I'm taking this gaming class, and so I'm experiencing what's the norms of a gaming community are, which could be quite different than what the norms of a social media community that's professional or professionally oriented in terms of a career path. And so I think that's again back to the question of audience and back to the question of the ability to have the right literacy and the right vocabularies and understand the discourse.
Yeah, and it brings up for me the question of translation, of sort of, and translate an audience, like, and a sort of exhibition, especially thinking about your, the final piece where you're actually showing, like, bringing some of the digital projects that you've gotten, like, into the quad, right? And sort of what happens when that transfers, and like you said, how complex that is. And then thinking purposefully, like, about whatever project it is, if it's a professional project on LinkedIn, or if it's a gaming project, like sort of, but what the problem for me is that I'm just trying to figure out is that what happens when there are multiple projects, you know, or when there are multiple emotional investments, you know, because for me, like it doesn't map easily, like what is professional, what is my like emotional friendships, and you know, what these other places where I participate is. And so I was wondering for you guys, how do you see them overlapping or separating in very discrete ways, which I'd be surprised.
Yeah, it seems that there's sort of different dimensionalities. So I really see the sort of text-based mediums as being a sort of a two-dimensional dimensionality to it, and this sort of virtualization and expanding into 3D representation is giving opportunities for sort of more museological approaches to content and to content creation itself. And in many ways, I think that that's where a lot of novelty is starting to emerge as well.
I find it extremely liberating, to be completely honest, because I have these parts of my personality, of my work experience, of my passions, interests, scholarly pursuits, and I used to think I had to keep them all separated in different boxes. And what technology is enabling me to do is to expose them in different forms that are more or less appropriate, and find community and find collaboration with people that I wouldn't necessarily ever get to know or experience, and to me that's been liberating and hugely valuable. I don't know, we have questions. I'd love to hear from other people.
Thanks very much. It was really fascinating because of the kind of range of presentations, but also, you know, there's something about the different aesthetics in the different presentations that, for me, because we're thinking about not just, you know, verbal communication, but visual communication, other multimodal forms of communication, which is the title of the panel. But, you know, I was very interested, Mara, in your deep commitment to kind of the DIY non-professionalism, as contrasted, and also the kind of resources that implies, or how you make do with lots of resources. And sometimes that's a choice, and sometimes it's also just making do. Jher and the projects that like Lynn Hirschman-Leeson is doing, which have major funding, major institutions. They're like huge collaborations with people with major technological investment and backing already behind them. And also the aesthetic is quite different. And then Jacquie, you were sort of doing something else with sort of, giving us glimmers of the aesthetic kinds of projects that you've done, and thinking so clearly about, how important that is in ways that we don't always, surprisingly, for people in media studies and communication studies, maybe don't always think about quite as much as maybe we should. So I just wondered if we could talk about the three different kinds of aesthetics, but also the political economy of some of those aesthetics, and the decisions, and what does that all mean, again, for a feminist like myself, who's dealing mostly with scarce resources.
And for me, as a zine maker and a cartoonist and a fan, and yeah, so like the places I go on the internet there certainly go to the beautiful places, but a lot of the places aren't beautiful. I mean, they're very plain, and I think that I didn't think about that as I was planning my presentation. It was short, and it was mostly materials I already had on my computer, and I was just like, oh well, I have this and I have this and I have this, and you kind of put it together. And I think that reflects again the kind of the work process, right, of taking what I've got and putting it together and making something. And I think for me, and part of my like nervousness about the professionalization is when the bar is this like, this sort of beautiful, professionally made Web 2.0 cleanliness, that for me, I sometimes hesitate to put my work out there because it is so plain and because it is so homemade. And, I'm not of the generation where Facebook is my like template for how the internet should work. Like I came in a little bit earlier, and I go to places on the internet that look a little bit different than that. And so it's a way of thinking visually that I'm comfortable with, but I worry sometimes about, well, maybe I shouldn't worry. Maybe it should just be part of my professional, and it's all part of my work, right? It's part of the research that I do. But the commitment to those aesthetics as a signal to the people who are looking at it, that this is where I'm coming from, and these are the communities that I've come from, and that I'm still speaking to. I think the trouble is that I still want to talk to the people who have Facebook and Twitters and things like that. Yeah. So that's my thoughts on it.
For me, it's kind of a really fascinating thing because I'm actually much more entrenched in DIY now, but I had the opportunity to be in a professional context with a certain degree of resources, not like at a lean startup stage where we didn't actually have a lot of money, but for me, it's really about collaboration and finding, like a lot of times it's people that, yes, I know them professionally, but we just love working together in some way. We like creating together. We like brainstorming together. And I've always been like madly in love with texture and fonts and type and, now I sew. And so for me, there's something about the way I even work through problems that are related to aesthetics, that I guess it has just become very natural for me, but I don't necessarily, I think I actually take it for granted sometimes. But at the same time, I came back to grad school to explore some of the challenges I found in those environments where, as a feminist, I often had to live my values kind of covertly, and how I really learned to do it was through leadership and mentoring other women and things like that. And now being in a different environment, with a lot less resource, like finding other ways to reach out to people and other ways to share that. It's actually very similar to what Mel was talking about earlier, where there is a labor of love associated with it. But the other thing I really recognize is what you brought up yesterday, Kim, is fatigue around it too, because there's also a point of exhaustion where you just are so much about your self-directed effort and using your own sort of energy and emotional labor, there's a point where you have to kind of say, whoa, what is enough? So I don't know, it's kind of a circular answer, but.
And for me, I see this as a spectrum of virtualities in a sense. So being able to see from DIY maker culture to the sort of museum culture that's emerging around these spaces, I think it's important to sort of show how collaboration and cooperation between institutions, between a variety of participants, authors, artists, producers, are emerging new and novel spaces. So that's the main reason why I pointed to open source examples for Sirikata, for example, things that are being developed at large-scale universities that have large funding behind it, but then offer those resources back to the community as an open source GitHub project itself, for example.
Well, for me, thank you very much, all really good presentations. And yes, I'm more on your spectrum, but I'm mad at Facebook because that's where everybody is. I've tried Google Plus, nobody's there yet. But for me, what comes out in what you've done in relation to the project that we're trying to launch is a further complexity about what it means to be global. I mean, there's the layers that Alicia mentioned and that I was talking about, that Julie also mentioned, everybody mentioned it in different ways, the politics, including the politics of multiple politics of feminism and inclusion globally. But let me clarify. So then we're faced with as a potential journal, the process of also figuring out peer reviewing something that could be presented as on a Second Life platform, or virtual, or open source virtual platform, whichever it is. And it would require a team that could find the reviewers that should look into it with a great deal of comfort. And I have no problem with that because I think we have that team. So I mean, I'm just unpacking what literacies we need in order for this kind of a project to be different from that flat project that you guys had said, the PDF. But so scholarship becomes a real, I mean, it's exciting to me that here's this next generation presenting to us what we've kind of said, we want to break the barriers of traditional scholarship, but we will re-tradition them in a different way, right? And so it opens up a great deal of opportunities.
Well, I think one of the things that we've been talking about today and yesterday also is sort of how to build organizations and institutions and remake them and really push on what we want as far as those things. And so I think what's interesting about these conversations is like this is about the individuals who are going to be a part of that, and sort of how do we make impressions, and how do we make choices about what impressions we make, and how does the technology and the praxis of that, how does that work out? And yeah, you raised some good points.
And to push on the political economy, also the digital divide is refigured in different ways, and of course, again, coming back to my as I responded to Alicia, we need to first figure out what we are going to say and how we're going to say it, and what multiplicities will include in it or exclude, until we become visible, and then it's from true philosophy people are enough. But this also just hanging out a lot, for instance, in Second Life or on Facebook, I realized, and in Bungie, the journal, I realized how global those environments are and for what reasons, which is again a political economy reason. It's people reaching out to find re-literate themselves, and there are various kinds of populations that can happen, which again will require us to think about what it means to write in multiple languages. Don't mean multiple languages just as in Skype. French or English language.
I think that the spectrum, I really appreciate that way of conceptualizing it, because I think it's really true. And when you think about Facebook as a platform, it's really thinking about it in a way, well, we can't ignore it, and many organizations are in fact abandoning their own web pages and only using Facebook. And so what is it about that platform that is useful and meaningful, yet where are the gaps and how do you fill them otherwise?
Yes. The digital divide heights.
Exactly, yeah.
But it seems you might also want to be weary of Facebook in that very sense, because when we talk about things like net neutrality and open access, what Facebook tries to do is become the internet itself.
Right.
And it becomes a gatekeeper in a way that makes a lot of people nervous. And I have friends who say, they got banned, and they were so happy that they got banned because it, made them realize I don't need this crap. And then once you step out of that, it seems like if you're going to try and build a political identity, Facebook's not the place to do it.
It's not designed for that.
Right.
But thinking about, like, for my students who are, not that much younger than me, but enough that there's a difference in the way that we do the internet. And for them, a lot of, 3 days, 4 days of internet culture and theory, and then the day that we talk about Facebook, suddenly the room is alive, and suddenly they're interested in talking. And so it's I don't know what to do with that.
And the question is the intervention participating in, or is it avoiding, right? And so I think that question has to be very thoughtfully considered, and different audiences are going to engage in different ways with different platforms. And that's why the spectrum is really useful, because again, we can't think of it as an either or.
Not one internet.
Yeah.
Right, and applying these open source principles to social networks, I think, is going to be important in the future as well. I think I recently read a report about how Facebook is using its proprietary schema by utilizing trade secrets as the method for data siloing. And so in that regard, I would highly recommend, and I don't think there's any one best example yet, but in terms of collaboration, folks have crowdsourced and crowdfunded funding for a decentralized social network named Diaspora. It's just an example, for example. I think there's Buddy Cloud and some other ones that are emerging that, again, speak to this spectrum itself.
But I do want to say that, and I wanted to bring up a certain point in terms of using Facebook or not. And I'm first qualified. I'm the person who, when I see papers about Facebook to review for journals or for conferences, will roll my eyes and say, another Facebook article, whatever. But I do want to talk about the place that common is. And again, by this I mean both things like Second Life and Facebook. Second Life is crappy. Its graphics are crappy. It's graphy. It's total low end. It's whatever. Just like when you say you game, and then your students say they play Farmway, where are the people at? So we have to look at also and how many people are there, and where are they? The ghettoization of the international users of Orkut was until they moved into Facebook, right? They're all on Facebook now. There was this whole exodus from Orkut to Facebook. MySpace has kind of disappeared. So if Facebook has somehow, for some reason, so I'm not saying that we don't use, it's not an all or nothing. We may use some of these other networks for different things. But in terms of where going back to the notion of branding, we are an enterprise that will have to brand data at some point. Nobody is that. But that's what we were talking about, right? What level are we in the Google search engine? And in terms of access to readers, you may hate it, but you may want
until they go away.
And I guess I should clarify that I should have posed that as a question, because otherwise I'm a guy living in a glass house that has a piano. Because I'm using Google as a course reader, so it's not very fair to phrase it like that. I should have, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't think you were saying that.
Right.
You just gave me the opportunity to say what I was saying.
Yeah, this side of the room. I just had two comments or observations about social media, and I think sometimes like with Facebook or why, like I think it was in Jack's presentation, like why or who feels like they can tweet what and like in what context or whatever. And I think there's something about the technology itself and how the frustration of social media for me now anyway is that you can't have multiple identities. Like it actually with Facebook and Google Plus actually want you to use your real name, and there's sort of this idea that you're What's that?
I do.
But I'm just saying, like with Twitter, why I use it maybe is that with TweetDeck you can actually sign into multiple accounts. So I can have Norman Pollocks, and I can have Mel Hogan, and I have quite a few, and they're just I like to keep them separate because, and this comes back to Mara's point of you don't. I think you were kind of saying like you don't want to be online because you want to keep some sort of privacy. For me, there's something about being online to shape, I guess, the perception of me that people are going to have, so that they don't fill in those like blanks themselves. Because I think when you're working in like communication media, people expect you to be online. They Google you, they find you. So I would rather control that in some ways, but I really like to be able to separate those things. My frustration with social media right now is that you can't have multiple personas. You can't have, you have to sign in, sign out. It sounds like something, but it's actually really annoying. And the other thing that I've noticed is just that I'm not on Facebook, and it took me a long time to get on Twitter, and I kind of like it, but my observation of it is that your relationship to social media changes too, like to a platform. The way you use it at the beginning is really different from how you use it a month or two into it, and I haven't seen anyone sort of like talk about that. It's not a platform, it's like this whole relationship that you develop with the technology, which is really interesting. Not a question.
And also once you understand the norms and the etiquette and how it works, I mean, you understand how to connect with people, how to build a relationship, how to build trust, where to get information.
The primary social media sites in Japan were anonymous. Like you could remain anonymous. Like Channel 2, you can just post in your number. Or Mixi, you would remain anonymous. But Facebook has now surpassed those media in Japan. And it's really changed the way people are dealing with each other outside of the digital realm.
Wow.
So it's really been a shift in in-group and out-group in a bit in Japan because of Facebook. You have to have a profile. Where in Mixi, you didn't.
It kind of goes back to something that you were saying, Mara, an issue I think that's haunted both the sessions, and that's the issue of labor.
Yes.
And who is going to do the work of this? Because we're constantly talking about, we've got to worry about our brand, and you've got Twitter, and you've got Facebook, and you've got to manage this, and you've got to manage that. And everyone loves the idea of Fembot. We all love the idea of online publishing. Radhika and Kim and our graduate students from Concordia all came out here to talk about it. But at the end of the day, we've got to figure out who's going to do the work of this and how it'll get done. And I worry about two things. I worry about the professionalization part of things. Because as a more senior faculty member, I feel very responsible for my graduate students, for my junior colleagues. But the feminist part of me doesn't want the professionalization to drive the project. Because I think then we lose our heart and we lose our soul. And we lose a lot of the love and the joy that we bring to it. And so I would say that, at some point, whether it's this weekend, whether it's in a video conference that we have, we need to sit down and get our commitments in line and figure out what are we going to do? Who's going to edit the thing? Who's going to be on the editorial board? What are you willing to do? And maybe to go back to a point that was made earlier, what's the part of it that you love to do, right? Like I've had this conversation a little bit with Chelsea, who's excited about the dirty laundry section, right? And that's great, right? Because then you have someone who says, I think dirty laundry would be really fun to do. And I'm willing to work on it for this period of time. But I really feel like without those kinds of concrete commitments, and without figuring out what's a match. What's a match of the things people, because when we talked earlier, Mara, we said, well, Mara, why don't you do, an online comic for Fembot? Because it's something she loves to do, it's something she's really good at doing, and it would be a great addition.
And I would do it, where I would I'll sign up and I'll say, oh yes, I'll research that, and then it'll go to the bottom of the list.
I mean, and this really comes into play with things like the beta reading, which I will do beta reading because I'm committed to it, and because I already do all this other reading for free, and I'm just going to say no when Ruth asks me to review a manuscript. That's just not going to be one of my priorities anymore. My priority will be I am part of a pool of beta readers, and if I get asked to read 3 papers over the course of the year, I will do that. And I will do it in a timely and responsible fashion. So I don't know how to do that collaboratively. You know what I mean? I don't know how, because we all talk and people will say, oh, that's really exciting, and then you see them backing off, or they don't look in your eyes when you pass them or they kind of avoid you when you're at a cocktail party. And you think, well, what are our commitments? And what are we willing to do?
And what's exciting about it, I think, is the key. Because you're right, like if you're not, and I'm really happy with thinking, to just, like I said, for 30 seconds, like think about it not as a professional endeavor. Because for me, I feel a lot of pressure to make sure that everything I do as a graduate student can go on the CV in a place that will be impressive,
It's really interesting how you think of professionalization, because I think of it quite differently.
I think of my career as this portfolio of stuff I do, and some of it is my sewing, and some of it is the social media work I do, and some of it's my scholarship, and some of it's design stuff. And so, and maybe that's because I worked in the private sector, and so I've really reconfigured how I think of what professionalization is.
And actually, what I go along agreeing with Jacquie is I never worked in the private sector, but I've had to reconfigure what professionalization is because of the work I do and what I create. Again, going along the lines of what it means to write about specific kinds of issues. Maybe because I'm a workaholic and I wouldn't crochet or weave unless it had any connection with my research. Or maybe because I'm justifying my research as part of my research. But it all connects if you look at it. And that's the kind of, if you're doing kind of cultural studies, feminist type of work, it's your whole thing, and you have to find the connections. And if you are going to do the comics and organize that would be your passion. And I can very well see it being a very successful professional segue into something. And it's perfectly achievable.
But there are some things that we aren't going to see. Part of it is this. There are some things that will have to be done that nobody's going to be passionate about, right? And I think, so the first part of it is finding out what's a match with passion, and that's easy, and that's good, and that's exciting. But then there's stuff like some of the editing, which if people aren't willing to commit to that, then it becomes a disproportionate burden of labor on a very few people in the collaboratory, or whatever we're going to call it.
I'm kind of passionate about it.
You know what I mean. There's so much
I think in that sense we're passionate about it because we want to make that intervention. And so, but I do get Carol's point, and I need to say this now because it struck me. It's like you made a really good move in making us physically come, because this is somebody who understands the nature of collaboration and understands, those people walking through because this is what happens in interdisciplinary programs. It's like everybody says, "Oh yeah, I'll do that," and then whoever is heading the program,
then you see them ducking away from it.
Yeah, they duck away, and then they started a project. If it doesn't get completed, it's my fault.
Yeah.
So that's so, and know where you're coming from. And I said, kudos to you for actually dragging us down here. Not that you have to drag us here. But that's part of it. I agree, and that's where I also have learned to talk about good hierarchy and bad hierarchy. Sorry, because you have to have a hierarchy, and there is always a hierarchy. The hierarchy will fall into place if we don't consciously start it. And and so it's like, okay, guys, if you want to do something that you're passionate about, also do something that you're bored with.
Honestly, there's craft work or grunt work or whatever you want to call it with every job, right? And so there's a degree of, yes, you get to do the fun stuff and stuff you're passionate about, but you kind of have to still do some of the other stuff.
Someone's got to clean the dishes.
Exactly. Like it's.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that comes with professionalization, thinking about this idea, is not letting the professionalization also stifle the many heads that the project might have. Because I mean, even if we think about it on a professional level, like when I try and narrate my educational experience, I went from being a music performance major to being in anthropology and philosophy, and now I'm in a journalism and communications program. And I did research on zombies in Canada, and now I'm doing research on sound in Gibraltar, and I was in Malta for a while. I narrate that, even though it's all really interesting and really valuable. And so the project, you don't want to professionalize it because then people say, well, your professional project has no direction.
But look, working on this kind of project is going to be really important. I think that's the part of it that we forget about, right? That this is the kind of work that's going to show up on your CVs, and people are going to say, I mean, look at Tara McPherson's first book, right? Which is on, and the move that she made was a really big kind of sea change. But now, people look at what she's doing, they look at her project, and you're on the cutting edge of a huge change. That in and of itself is a big deal. I mean, that's marketable if you want to talk about it in those terms.
And one other thing I'm going to say is that this is not to whatever ourselves boost Carol and myself and other faculty members involved in this, not to kind of put ourselves on a higher level. But I want to say that, and this is something I realized I've been starting to say this to some of my faculty students who kind of play their research down, and after the defense would say, oh, you guys just passed me because whatever. I said, that's offensive to me. You're suggesting that I pass substandard research. Okay?
Yeah.
The fact is, you're working with people who've made a name for themselves at some point. So you have to trust our cultural capital.
There's that.
We do have some capital. We don't have money. We will stick our face in the professional space for you guys. Because
But I also think that we're all very different personalities. Like, I don't care. And I don't care what I do, whether it's, I'm totally amazed. I'm a professor. Believe me for this.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing to me that I'm here and, this stuff gets to happen and people even read a word I write. It's incredible to me. So I just sort of feel like, oh, well, that means you can try anything and something good will happen. And I have to say, 15 PhD students and 45 MAs later, almost all of them have work. And all of them, as Mel and Jacquie will testify, almost always I will say, take the risk.
Yeah.
And they do. And they get employed. But, maybe Canada's just weirder because we have the zombies. That I didn't even know about. Now I'm really worried to go home. So you have to tell me where. But, I just sort of feel like, if feminism, if we would, we've got to be bold and trust that we are making the future for heaven's sake. I believe that. And if you don't take those risks, you just, what a dull life.
What a dull life.
What a dull and unchanging life. And I think that, social movements have to be fun. They're hard. They're lots of work. Online and face-to-face is really good. And, I just sort of think we take the risk. And as graduate students, all I can say to you is like, they hired me. So they'll hire you. That's a good point. If we got hired. And if people don't want to hire you, you don't want to work with them.
Right, that's true.
So I firmly believe that this kind of, also, there is a certain professionalization that you learn working on these kinds of projects, which is you learn from the inside out how knowledge is made and how it can get completely fucked up. And how all the kind of both systematic, even with everything you try to do to be democratic and really right and go by your own principles, you will make mistakes. But it's just, wow. Are we ever fortunate and privileged to be in a position to say we can even dream about this? And ask, how do we want to make it happen? So that we actually want to keep working on it. And also, I do believe we'll work on your CVs.
I do too.
You learn so much from doing it from the inside out, as Marx would have said. You know.
So, getting back to Carol,
So that's my
let's get the hierarchy settled.
The good hierarchy.
Yes, the good hierarchy.
I mean, I never thought I would even think that maybe we should have a second light presence, but all of a sudden it's like, holy crow, after
And like I said, I mean,
but then I'm thinking, who's doing that?
No.
but like I said,
We can do it in World of Warcraft.
let's start with what we wanted to begin with, and then I somebody like me, I wouldn't mind starting that kind of work, but then I want to first, like Carol said, boring stuff has to get done too.
Yeah.
So while that's getting done, maybe we could figure out how does this other presence also develop?
Well, I figure doing boring stuff with feminists is not so bad. You know, you could be doing boring stuff with like horrible dudes, with horrible dudes, and that would not be fun. Yeah. The bros.
No, I actually think it's not if you're trying to figure out, for instance, how to make English global and not colonial. And that's peer reviewing.
So where it's a problem is if you give the same cohort of people all the boring work and all the crap work all the time. So that's your bad
That's why I
hierarchy.
said good hierarchy, rotations.
Well, and I think that means senior people need to be doing the scut work. I mean, we're talking about a lot of digital projects where it really seems like it's the graduate students who are doing all the work on it. And, you know, so you have to be attentive to the hierarchies and make sure that the labor is being distributed fairly, and that people who may not know how to do some things are being taught how to do some things.
Right. And are we then talking about a little bit of reverse hierarchy in terms of learning?
You know?
A reverse of traditional hierarchy. I'm not talking about reverse hierarchy at all, but in the sense that the people with the skills need to then train those of us who don't have some of those skills, or who have dabbled in it but don't have as much as it requires to, so that we could carry